LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board here. I'm glad you're listening. I hope you had a great week. We are, take a few moments if you would, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. If you don't want to use YouTube, you can certainly visit my page on Rumble. Just go to Wildlife Control Consultant and you can get the podcast from Rumble. This week we are, of course, continuing our in-depth discussion with Dr. Niamh Quin of the University of California Cooperative Extension, and her title is Human-Wildlife Interaction Advisor. And so this is part 3. So if you just stumbled on my podcast, you're going to be kind of midway through the whole conversation we had. So I would encourage you to start at the beginning, go back to part 1 and start along there, but certainly the information we have here. So what is it that she's discussing in this particular segment? And again, some of my cuts have been sort of arbitrary here, just for the space of time. We have, she's discussing the challenges of some of the research that she was involved in. I raised the issue of, is there a need in the research community for a rodent control society, just like we have various organizations that are involved in research on insects or wildlife? Do we need something dedicated to the management of rodents so that we can get critical mass on some of these issues? Because we're really struggling as we're getting more and more pressure from the EPA regarding the reduction, the more limitations on rodenticides. And plus, as Dr. Niamh Quin says, we know more about polar bears, as she said, than we do about rodents. And that's kind of a scary thing to think about to a certain degree. And so it shows the complexity of the rat and the house mouse and other commensal rodents that we're struggling with to keep them out of our buildings and out of our food supply. And this is important information. So I do hope you're going to enjoy this presentation. Here is our conversation with Dr. Niamh Quin of the University of California Cooperative Extension. I think the difference and I can see that with certain pest control companies because there's so much emphasis on production. They also make more money, but in the wildlife control field, where we often don't have access to the rodenticides, because many wildlife control operators don't have a pest control license, and for the animals they control, there is no pesticide legal anyway, so it doesn't matter. But they will. If there's something about trappers, as it were, although wildlife control is more than just trapping, you're always tweaking you have to spend the time, because trapping in and of itself is so time intensive that you have to spend a little bit more time. You can't just simply drop your bait station every 15 feet. You just can't.
I think that happens with rats too. I just don't think we know how to do it. And it's funny. I feel like trapping is definitely a science. But I don't think that any trappers have ever, or any scientists have ever worked with any trappers to figure it out. But I know from our coyote work, when I'm working with our trappers, I can see them. I just know we're going to be successful because I can feel their energy from the trap set, right? And it's so funny. I remember one of the, it was a couple of months ago, we were out with our trapper. It's a county trapper in LA, and we're in a flood control basin, and it had rained a bit, but not then. We can't really trap when it rains because we're under a lot of different constraints as scientists, ethical constraints, and we really don't want our coyotes to get out, out from and especially we trap in a lot of debris basins, so they're more wet than your typical trapping sites sometimes. And so, but it had been wet, it dried up, and our trapper, a guy that called Burgos, was like, "Oh, these coyotes are massive." And I was like, "Nah, it's been raining." But he's like, "We're definitely going to catch that big one." I was like, "Nah, I don't know, Stephen." And that's why I work with trappers, because I'm not stupid enough to think that I can do it myself. I nearly swore there, but sure enough, and 38 pounds is a big coyote for California. That's a big Western coyote. This thing was massive, like absolutely giant. That's one of the biggest coyotes we've ever recovered. Never mind, it is the biggest coyote we've ever caught.
Wow,
But like,
38
it's funny.
pounds.
It's like, I think it's science because
Hmm.
but like I think for a trapper, it's like intuition, right? But if you
Yeah,
have that, but if you make those observations over and over and over and over and over again, that is science. And
it
so,
is. Yeah.
but I think that it's the same for the bait station. I think that as a trapper, you would never plop down like your trap, like ever. You're like,
Hmm.
there's like so many different
Yeah.
things. Like, what time of year is it? Like, are they more interested in like and I don't know all the different terms for the scents, but like some of them are more like territorial
Yep.
type
Yep.
ones. Some of them are a little bit more like food based.
Yeah. So you have food, curiosity. You have like the pheromone type lures that are out
Yeah.
there. So
And we
yeah.
have all that for insects and
Yeah.
stuff as well. What do we have for rodents? Absolutely nothing.
Well, that's an interesting thing because there's some products being marketed now. I know of one that's being marketed now that says it takes away the rodent fear. And I was doing some literature work, and I think I found a product, but I just have to play with it. But they're talking about some very micro, it's like a pheromone. Um, so I'd be interested to see if that's true. But there's a lot of chem lure making and trapping is sort of like the alchemy of chemistry. There's a lot of mystique with it, and the magic goal is trying to find that lure that's going to just pull them in. But the reality is, location is always best. It's always number one, and the lure just brings them the last few feet, or it may help them overcome some fear, basically. But at least that's. But we haven't had the kind of research on some of these baits I would like to see because again, it's so time consuming and expensive.
And it's difficult to work in a managed system as well, right? So
Yeah.
like, it's really hard to like be like, if you're thinking about trying to find like a control site, so as like a scientist, like it's really important to have like the nothing, right? The no management, the coyotes that are not exposed to rodenticide,
Right. Right.
those places, those things don't really exist, and so
Right.
it does make it more difficult as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a good challenge, and it's sometimes, and then some days you're just like, oh Jesus, what did I get myself into? Like,
Yeah.
it's just difficult.
So let's try to transition. So you've done a lot of rodent work now, and you're doing more. So that's coming. You have your Rodent Academy coming up soon. That's coming up in March. It's almost full. Probably by the time people hear this, it will be full. Talk a little bit about that for people to sort of think about if they wanted to come and attend that in the future.
Yeah, well, it's called the West Coast Rodent Academy, and certainly there are other rodent academies out there. So just don't think that the one in California is the only one. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think it's the best one,
Sure.
obviously. But
Yeah.
there's ones in Texas and New Orleans, and there's ones in Arizona, and I think there's developments to get some in other states as well. And obviously there's the original Rodent Academy by Bobby Corrigan
Right.
in New York.
In New York. That's
Um,
right.
and so our Rodent Academy is held twice a year, generally in March and in November.
Okay.
And it's a 3-day event, and it's tracker block. Like, there's a lot going on in there. And we talk about a lot of things, it's really, we kind of start at the start with like rodent biology, behavior, ID, which are kind of like the building blocks to any rodent management
Mm-hmm.
program. And then we move into like disease, and like it's more it's more about the PMP or the customers, like what, it's not about like random rodent diseases. It's kind of the diseases that a PMP could be exposed to, right? And
Right. Right.
it's funny because I ask at the start of every rodent academy how many people have been exposed to a rodent disease, and I'm generally the only one that puts up my hand. So I always say, do as I say, not do as I do,
Right.
because you can make very stupid decisions as a field biologist sometimes.
Get
Yeah,
we get care. You're not the only one. We get careless in the field. Yes,
yeah.
without a
And it can
doubt.
be very dangerous, and
Yeah.
a lot of people that are presenting with these unusual diseases are actually PMPs that are doing wildlife body recovery in subspaces, things
Yeah.
like that, right? So we do that. There's a huge focus on exclusion, which we've already talked about. It's a
Hmm.
very, very important part of a program that I think that people often neglect.
They
And I
do.
think that I think that what's great about exclusion is that exclusion for a mouse and exclusion for a possum, it's the same. It's almost the same thing, right? It's just about the general tools that you need. And so the guy that leads our exclusion breakout, it's all hands-on, and we have a number of hands-on things as well. So it's not just classroom learning, but like we get people out so they can get their hands dirty and just not just sitting on their backsides all day. Like it can get very boring to be listening to, and it's not all science driven, so it's not just me standing up there, it's peer led as well, right? So people from the industry that have actually experience in the industry. Now I can whack rats with the best of them for sure, Stephen, but like it's not my job, right? My job is science, but it's important to have people that are like understand the industry. And I understand the industry too, but I'm not in it, right? And so we work with a lot of different manufacturing partners, our distribution partners. We have people from different cities come in, talk about trapping, talk about rodenticide. Even we have things about talking to the media, because what happens when you mess up? What happens when you get reported to a company, or what happens when you have a rat fall out of a ceiling in a restaurant that you manage, and like that happens all the time, and companies are just not prepared for it. Or the PMP gets they get like ambushed when they're there on their service. And so like we do even stuff like this, and then like we actually make our PMPs develop and sell us a rodent survey. So they have to use everything that they've learned in the first like 2.5 days, and in the final day, like they're split into groups, and then they have to do we develop like scenarios. And it's funny because a lot of my scenarios are actually real scenarios that are based on like friends or like situations that I've been involved in. And then they have to talk about like they have to, and we're not really interested in price. Like we're just kind of interested in how they use the information, like what different, like are they using new technologies? Are they thinking about how they use their rodenticides differently? Are they thinking about the health impacts of the job? Because maybe one of the jobs isn't actually like a musk job, like a house mouse job. Maybe it's actually permiscus, right? And are they thinking about the health implications of things like that? And then we actually have 3 prizes. We have the Innovators Award. So just someone that's just, you don't even have to think that far out the box. Even if you have like a plan that encompasses everything or thinks a little bit different. We have a technical award, which I generally grill them and ask them the technical questions. And if you get it wrong, you don't win the prize, right? But then one of my favorites is that we get someone from our administrative staff to come in who knows nothing about rodents, right? And she grills them. It's great. Like, and it's just like dealing with the customer, right? That knows nothing. Well, what about my cat? Or I don't want poison. Like I've heard that they get thirsty and they die in the walls or whatever, and then they have to be able to react to that based on the scientific or like technical information that they've received. So like, I think it's really, I mean, I'm biased, but I do think it's really great. And we've collected a lot of information from surveys. People learn a lot. People are able to use the tools that we give them. And then, they make great links from, industry as well. And, we've had everybody from people that have literally never done a rodent job before, like it's day one, to people that have been on the job for like 50 years and they're still learning things.
Do you have a manual? Is there a manual with it?
So we do.
Yep.
And I don't know if anyone's ever been to Bobby Corrigan's academy, but like I was like lifting weights by the time I was coming home on the plane.
Yeah.
And so like we tried to condense that down. And like some of our stuff is on the website, and we are actually trying to condense it down even more. Like we want it to be something that you put in your glove box and then that you can pull out every so often if you have a question. But people don't use it that often. Because like you're too busy, right? You're in the field and you're too busy. And like then after you're done with your Terry, after your 350 bait stations in the 95 degrees Southern California, like the last thing you want to do is open a flipping manual to see what's going on.
But what about those of us who like to get into the weeds?
the weeds.
Well, you will definitely be able to take your manual home with you if you ever attend, Stephen. So
because I've been to Corrigan's twice.
Yeah.
I was privileged to get out there to Corrigan's twice, but I think because when I was doing some research, I'm revising Frischman's book on the vertebrate pest manual, and I'm narrowing it down just for commensals. I was disappointed with how hard it was to find the same kind of parallel information that we have on Norway rats. Like, they'll have, how far can a Norway rat fall and survive, right? They have where people were just tossing, I don't know, tossing animals out or having them jump. And it was interesting to see how we don't have the same level of data for roof rats, because you like to kind of put them in a parallel line, what's their birth rate, how many times, and it's like we don't know. Like, what do you mean we don't know? And we don't know. And I'm like, how is this possible?
You knew Rex Baker, right? Have you met Rex from Cal Poly Pomona? Yeah. And like Rex was, I think I have these great ideas, and I would go to Rex, who has obviously since passed on, and I would go to Rex and I go, hey Rex, I have this great idea. And he's like, oh yeah, we did that. But he never had time to publish it because he was very focused on his teaching as well.
Yeah.
And so, and then his house went on fire, and everything that he could have published went on fire.
Oh, no.
And so, gosh. I'd say Rex's files have so much information. But what's interesting is that even though Rex was based in Southern California, what was all his research on?
Well, he did things on pocket gopher. I have stuff on pocket gopher.
His rat-focused research was all nori rats, and part of it was because in some of the there was duck farms and things like that did have a lot of nori rats back in the day, but they're all gone, and along with them, the nori rats have essentially vanished from Orange County at least.
And so they've been filled in by roof rats.
Yeah, because roof rats. Because there's no trash. And that's it goes back to my hypothesis. Why are there no Norway rats in Orange County? Because there's nothing for them to eat.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating, well, I'll be interested in how that explores out. So if people want to have the Rodent Academy in their own state, is there a program that they could either import you folks to go lead the class, or is this something where you would have the materials and you would say, here's go forth and do your thing? Or is it, how would that work for them?
We would be delighted. I'm not saying that I'm going to have all the time to travel to whatever 50 states. And it's interesting, we have someone coming to the Rodent Academy for their second time from Alaska, which is interesting. But we would love to have that conversation with if it's a state association, your state association for pest management, whether it's an academic that's in cooperative extension or even not in a land grant university. I would be so happy to discuss our model. And I think if just for example, they wanted to host a rodent academy in Montana, I'd be like, well, I know this guy called Stephen Vantassel that knows a lot about but you know what I mean? Sometimes it's the connection is missing.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
So that's all available. Well, that's something for people, because there are most of our industry has just small businesses, often one-person operations, but there are some that are getting larger, and they will actually sometimes host a training event and bring in other corporations and have 20 or 30 people and that sort of. So definitely we'll provide that information. Again, it's Dr. Niamh Quin out of University of California Cooperative Extension. She is on the web, so she's not that hard to find. How about we transition over into coyotes? Are you doing anything more with coyotes?
Yes, we are. But coyotes are, the reason I study coyotes is because of rats, right? So I am not.
You study coyotes because of rats?
Well, it's because of rodenticides, right?
Oh, right. Okay, all right. Okay.
And so I think that people that work with coyotes are absolutely flipping crazy, Stephen. I can't believe that A, people do it for fun, and B, people do it for money. And I'm I am obviously not from a place that has coyotes, right? And so I'm all naive and
right.
I'm a fairly positive person. But trapping coyotes will stamp that positivity out.
How are you trapping them? Are you using cages?
No, we're not that bad. Okay,
Okay,
we're
well
not that bad. So we use the colorum,
okay.
because
All right.
I can't catch a non-target, right? There's so many implications for me if we catch a non-target. And
Oh,
so
gotcha. All right, for IACUC. That for those of you who are listening, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee is the governing body that manages animal research in the university, and so researchers, as Niamh Quin is obligated to follow the guidelines of this Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. Having been through it, it is yeah, I'm so glad in the state I don't have to fuss with it. So
there's a lot of swear words generally that are incorporated with discussions with IACUC that
yes,
we won't say here.
It's gotten worse. It's one of the reasons why people don't go into wildlife research is because it's such a pain.
I don't think that. I think it's a necessary step. Like, I think we should be especially if death's an endpoint. Like, we shouldn't be killing more things than we need to. But when it comes to rats, it's frustrating because people are out there every day doing it, and here we are trying to do it as
no, I totally
possible.
agree. Sometimes there's been some research where we're just repeating the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result, and that gets a little useless. But the problem is that when you're doing lethal research, they like.
Oh, they hate it.
They're getting on your nerves. In a lot of universities won't even allow it anymore. And
no.
so it's like, well, what's the point?
So our isotopically labeled bait, which is and we talked about it before on the podcast, where like we're trying to develop this bait, and we're not trying anymore. We've been successful, right? We're trying to develop this bait that we can trace up multiple trophic levels. So like if a rat eats it, we know, but then if a coyote eats that rat, then we know. And we've never had that before. We've never had a tool that we can trace through multiple levels. We've had tools where we can trace through one level, right? Like different things. We have this tool now, and this project has been a nightmare, and the nightmare started with IACUC, right? That we had they were really unhappy that we had to kill all the rats because we had to be able to feed the rats to the coyotes. Now, we didn't kill any coyotes. That was another IACUC journey, right?
But you weren't doing your study on the rats, were you?
No, we weren't, but we still needed IACUC approval to kill the rats because they were part of the study. So I needed IACUC approval to kill the rats. Then I needed separate IACUC approval to feed the rats to the coyotes. And then I needed more approval to do our pilot study, which is what we're in now. And so what we were trying to do is we were trying to develop this bait. And like the reason why we're trying to develop this bait is because, I had this like whole succession plan of really what we wanted to achieve. And like what we wanted to achieve is to provide governing agencies with a tool to get research-driven mitigation measures, or to be able to test the success of mitigation measures. And we have that tool now. Granted, we've proven that it works in a controlled situation, but we haven't proven that we can do it in a field. And now I think because it works in the control situation, it doesn't actually matter that we have this very small pilot study, mainly because our tool is ridiculously expensive, ridiculously expensive, but I think it's totally worth it. It works really well. We can detect it. We've developed methods to detect rodenticide in fur and in feces.
So you can do a hair capture study, then you can just do hair snags?
That's what we wanted to do, we wanted to do hair snares, but what we figured out in the process is that you'd have to literally Brazilian wax your animal to get enough hair for it to work. But we know that, like, just say, and like this happens all the time for, like, just say like we have people in the Northwest that have done fisher work and they've recovered just like pelts of animals. Like you could actually test them for rodenticide exposure now, right? You could a scavenged animal, you could also test. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not really sure, but
I think that's a good thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an extra tool, right? And it's like it increases your sample size and increases the sample of the things that you were able to do. So like I was just really excited. Now what we're doing now for our coyote work is we are trying to trace rodenticide exposure in live carnivores, which has never been done before, right? All rodenticide researchers do is they scrape dead stuff off the road, right? And like you're already dead, right? And so have you lived with your rodenticide exposure? Have you been exposed multiple times? Like where have you been exposed? So we have this great student that basically walks miles and miles and miles several times a week, and she goes to like the areas where these collared coyotes are. and she's a poo picker upper. That's, and she picks up fresh scat. And so what we do is, and like people are probably going to start rolling their eyes because like this is just ridiculous science, right? So we split the poo in half. Half goes to one lab. And I don't know if you know this, but probably most of your listeners don't know this, but when you poo, you cover your feces with a layer of your own epithelial cells. So like your own skin covers your poop. Everybody.
So you DNA it as well then?
Yeah, so we DNA it so we know if it actually came from one of the coyotes that we captured.
Nice.
And then the other half, so that half goes to UC Davis, and then the other half goes to NWRC in Fort Collins in Colorado. And then they have developed the methods to test not just for anticoagulant rodenticides, also for cholecalciferol, also for bromethalin.
Really?
So so it's
nice.
I mean, we're super excited. And you said about like funding earlier, we got a huge injection of funding from the anticoagulant rodenticide task force for this project as well.
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, and this project was also funded by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation as well.
Okay.
And it's just so important to be able to monitor rodenticide exposure in live animals. So like it's kind of like, we kind of had this big, hairy, audacious goal essentially where like, it started with the isotopically labeled like bait. But like it kind of expanded to, we don't even need the isotopically labeled bait to just monitor it in general. Yeah. Now, it would be great if we have mitigation measures that are saying, hey, you can't broadcast, but you can use bait stations. Well, how do you know which one's better? How do you, there's no measure, but like with an isotopically labeled bait, like in a situation that's already saturated with rodenticide, right? Which I think is almost all ag and urban situations now.
I think this is what I struggle with. I mean, you're really on this is what in terms of the EPA's preliminary interim decision, right? They're really cracking down. They want to crack down on broadcast use and spot use, especially around recreational areas, golf courses and those types of things. I haven't really seen that in the some of the ag areas or the like rangeland and things like that. It seems like we're still going to be able to use it there. But it seems like they want everything to go to bait stations. I'm not convinced that bait stations are by definition safer than doing spot baiting or a broadcast.
You know why they'd be safer is because nobody will use them, right? I mean, it's just
I don't want to say that the EPA wants to ban it all. I think that's kind of what we're doing. My motto is if something works, we ban it. If it works great, we ban it faster.
Yeah.
I think I'm wondering if we should go back to 1080 and simply let producers control the species and have one treatment and be done with it for a while and have something real rather than having to keep going out and trying to control the stuff that's not working.
This whole like stabbing, like there is a problem, right? I mean, I don't know exactly the extent of the problem. I mean, is exposure a problem or is intoxication a problem, right? Because that's totally different, right? And I think that's kind of what we're facing in California. Like we're even going to the point where we think that Southern California coyotes are not as susceptible to rodenticide. And so like we're starting to do like genomic like research to see if that's true. Because 99% of our sample is exposed to anticoagulant rodenticide.
Yeah, because we don't know what that real level of effect is. We don't know what the lowest level of effect is for a coyote. How much exposure do they need to get before there's a negative effect? It's going to be different for different species, right?
Well, I always say that this is the example I always use. And I always pick on the poor guy that sat in the front row of my talk, right? Right. So I'm an Irish woman and now I actually don't drink. I'm a terrible example of an Irish woman, but just say when in my day, when I did drink a lot, when I used to play rugby and had a liver like a cement mixer, essentially. I could drink 10 pints, right? I bring an American with me and they drink 10 pints, right? I wake up in the morning and I'm hungover. That's a sublethal effect. The American does not wake up in the morning. That's a lethal effect.
He's
right?
Dead. Right.
Right. And it's the same toxicant, the same species, and totally different reaction to the same thing. And like, it's even interesting. Like, if you think like, like a coyote versus a mountain lion. Like coyotes don't have to work that hard to get their food, right? And if they're exposed to rodenticide, and we're all busting capillaries, like even just sitting here and not really moving that much, but like they're clotting themselves. You think of a coyote, right? They don't really have to work that hard to get their food. However, a mountain lion, it's like literally like a roller coaster to get a meal, right? And so like the effect of rodenticide could even between the species could be much worse on certain species than something like it because of things like that. They may be more susceptible because of life history stuff. And it's really complicated and it's not very black and white. And I feel like EPA have completely missed the point. Like I think that there's mitigation measures needed, but it's like this, right?
Yeah.
They're like, it's just... Or like they're reaching into a bag and being like, whoa, this is a good idea. Let's try this one.
Well, I'm sure the lawsuits didn't help because they're trying to flail around. It's sometimes lawsuits are a blunt instrument, right? So it's, which I don't know.
They have to do something, but there's like my point is now is that we have a tool and they should, like, they don't have to come to me to use it. I don't care, right? We will have this published eventually. And people should be, like, manufacturers should be forced to use it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And yes, it's expensive. It's not cheap. Most things aren't cheap, even. And so it's not ideal. And like it took us a lot of troubleshooting to manufacture it. I seriously, I barely even knew what an isotope was when I started, Stephen. And we had all these crazy ideas that we were literally going to mix it in a bowl in the lab. Well, no, that's not how it happened, right? It's way more complicated than that. And like our isotope was made by someone, and then it got sent to France, and then it came back to Milwaukee, and then it was in Fort Collins, and then it was in Logan, and
Stephen Vantassel again. Well, you've just completed part 3 of our conversation, with Dr. Niamh Quin of the University of California Cooperative Extension. Her title is the Human-Wildlife Interaction Advisor. So she has been doing some great work in the area of rodent control and some research, particularly in the area of roof rats. But I hope you've enjoyed this sort of very deep dive with a leading scholar in the area of rodent control. Do take a few moments, if you would, and subscribe to the channel. Definitely ring the bell. You could also visit me over at Rumble or at my website at wildlifecontrolconsultant.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. If you have questions, comments about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. If you have ideas for shows, definitely reach out as well, and we'd be happy to have that discussion with you. We're always looking to highlight new products and services and ideas from the wildlife control industry or the vertebrate pest community. Also, business issues are very big. So, of course, our audience is out there trying to make money servicing the needs of their clients, and so with anything that would help them as well, we would love to hear from you. Again, that's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Well, that's the end of part 3. Do stay tuned for next week. We'll have the final edition, part 4 of my in-depth interview with Dr. Niamh Quin of the University of California. Hope to see you next week. And again, you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.